Hello, my name is Corey Robinson, and I'm the Curator of History here at Fort Concho National Historic Landmark, and I'm going to show you just a little bit of the Douglas McChristian collection today.
All right, great.
Douglas McChristian was a longtime staff member of the National Park Service. He spent about 35 years working in the National Park Service at different sites throughout the country, places like Fort Davis and places like Fort Laramie. And he was also a researcher and scholar. So he researched the soldiers of the time period, of course concentrating on the Indian Wars era, post-Civil War up to the turn of the century. And he was a brilliant researcher and scholar of information from that time period, but he was also a researcher on the objects and uniforms of that time period. So it's always said that if you want to know the correct history, you go to the person who wrote the book on it. And he literally wrote the book on it.
Wow.
So he would write a couple of books concerning the equipment and uniforms of the soldiers from that Indian Wars era. And for years I had been utilizing those books to research and figure out the different types of clothing pieces and ammunition boxes and bayonets and the different ways that they used them, the different variations that the government would change every couple of years. So for years I'd been looking at that. Well, unfortunately, he came to us in 2018 and said he had a terminal illness. And his collection, which was the basis of his book, he wanted to find a good place to house it after he was gone, because the doctor said it wasn't going to be long before he passed away. So he contacted us and said, you know, I've been a friend of Fort Concho for a long time. Our director, Bob Bluthart, has known him for years and years. He had participated in many living history events with Fort Concho staff and volunteers. And so he approached us and said, you know, your site is different than some others. If it's a state site or maybe a federal site, if I was to sell or donate this to that location, it may be spread out across the country. And I would really like for that collection to be whole and be kept whole as a research collection for years. And so that's one reason why he approached us, because he knew that if it was to come to Fort Concho, that we could house it in its entirety forever and ever. So we worked out a deal and we were able to purchase that collection. And of course, unfortunately, he passed away. So early 2019, we drove up to his home, rented a U-Haul van, put the objects in boxes, and brought them back here to Fort Concho. A trip from Arizona to Fort Concho straight, because these were wonderful pieces and we didn't want to keep them in the U-Haul van for too long. So we arrived and started looking over everything that we had and a few pieces that were not necessarily in the original inventory. So in total, after looking at what we have, it numbers about 1,800 pieces. And these are some of the best pieces of military uniforms and equipment from this time period, even some that the Smithsonian doesn't have. One-of-one pieces, or one of only a handful of pieces known to exist. And then a lot of pieces that have provenance to them, so a history behind them, the person that wore this, we know who wore this, we know who used it. So it's a wonderful collection, and it's a very encompassing, overall encompassing collection, because he would collect with the mindset that I'm not just going to collect a bayonet, I'm going to collect every variation of the bayonets. I'm going to collect every variation of ammunition boxes and all the variations of uniforms that I can find. So for years and years, even prior to his service with the National Park, he would be collecting these objects. And so it's a wonderful study collection, because you can see the transition from this different piece to in 3 or 4 years they changed it, and in 3 or 4 years they changed it again. A lot of field pieces and trial pieces that they would send out to certain units, and they would have the field trials with it to see if it would work or wouldn't work. So 1,800 pieces, everything from the very small to the semi-large. So buttons all the way to foot lockers, uniforms and accoutrements, photographs and documents, underwear to gloves. Anything you can think of that the soldiers were issued or had, with the exception of major weapons, because we didn't get a weapons collection. We have in this, and we are very blessed to have this because of its rarity, its completeness, and again, he wrote the book on it, so these are worthwhile pieces. And what we plan on doing in the future with the Douglas McChristian collection is to incorporate it along with other military collections that we have and maybe getting in the future, and do it in an exhibit that really takes the visitor through the life of the enlisted men. So you start out as an enlistee and see what happened as an enlistee coming in, whether you enlisted in New York or Pennsylvania, or you came off a boat from Ireland and decided you wanted to enlist in Chicago, Illinois. and what would happen to that soldier from enlistment to training to being assigned to your post, in garrison, out in the field, gaining rank, everyday monotony, daily routines, fighting in the field, all the way to retirement. So utilizing these pieces of the soldier's history and the stories behind them so that we can bring the visitor through and tell them the story of how the enlisted men went through their enlistment all the way to their retirement. What we're doing right now, and as you can see behind me, we are just taking bits and pieces. Again, 1,800 pieces. We're not able to showcase every single piece that we have out. So we're kind of doing thematics, bringing out bits and pieces. So right now it's dress uniforms and everything that's associated with dress uniforms. So cavalry soldier, infantry soldier, in full dress, items associated with the dress uniforms, helmets and caps, the uniforms themselves, some of the insignia, and a few photographs showing some soldiers in their uniform from that time period. And right now, before the big exhibit happens, we're just kind of rotating out thematic. So it may be music, it may be summer uniforms, it may be accoutrements, boxes and bags, things like that. So we are very blessed to have something like this. And again, it's a one-of-a-kind collection that has been brought here to Fort Concho, National Historic Landmark.
I would love for people to come and see this for themselves. Do you have an estimate on when the future plans are likely to be put in place where more of the artifacts will be on display?
Sure. A few years ago, right before COVID hit, we had planned to create a master plan for interpretation, which was a 5 to 10 year plan of what we hope to do, not just with something like this, but through the entire site. What we want to do in the future as far as certain types of exhibits and how we want to transition certain exhibits into more modern times, maybe with technology, for example. Take some of our historic houses and upgrade and update them. So overall, having a full plan that would be a 5 to 10 year master plan, specifically for that exhibit concerning the enlisted men, which McChristian's exhibit will be the basis along with others. I hope to begin that next year. So you might start seeing remnants of the full exhibit the end of 2023 into 24. Currently we're working on a few other plans, and it's almost just, what the priority here, the A, B, and C, and then we'll tackle D, E, and F, and then we'll just keep going down the line. So 5 to 10 year plan is wonderful. We just got to do it in stages.
All right. Once again, I want people to come and visit these exhibits for themselves. So let's give them a little bit of a teaser. What do you think is the most significant or awesome exhibit in this room that is here now? And then people, if they want to see the rest of it and get a fuller interpretation of what is here, well, they'll just have to come and look for it themselves.
Sure. I think for me, the most influential piece is the inside-out jacket in the very corner over here.
Okay.
Because it shows how these enlisted men would acquire a uniform through the military, of course, utilizing many times their monies that was given to them, kind of like a special fund that was set aside, and they would use that money to purchase certain uniforms within the military. So you could get a uniform, it was yours, you wore it, it was of regulation. But once you ended your enlistment, so that retirement stage, you had these uniform pieces. You didn't want them, you sold them off. So this jacket actually went through 3 different soldiers, and their names are put in there with the opportunity of maybe another soldier having it, because there are remnants of where some ranking chevrons were put onto the uniform. So what I did is I turned it inside out to show the visitor, number one, what it looks like on the inside. You can see the sweat stains still from these soldiers wearing this in the hot climate of Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, wherever they were stationed. You sweated in this wool uniform. Yeah. But you can also see the numbering and the lettering that was put on there and stamping that was put on there. So there are 2 stamps right here from a Myron C. Wood. And then you have some company designation right under the armpit right there. And then on the opposite side, you have another soldier, Frank Gruber, who had written his name in there. So there's at least 3 soldiers that wore this, and possibly another one. But you come in and you don't really get to see the inside of these uniforms many times. So you can see all of this. You can see how the soldiers made it personal to themselves by stamping it. Maybe that was because people were getting uniforms and, selling them. They were stealing them. I don't know. I don't know what the story is and why you would want to stamp it, but it was yours. And so they took the time to actually put in some stamping and writing to say, this is my uniform. So there's that personal touch. And now we know who wore it. They were all part of the 2nd U.S. Cavalry. And when they wore it, from 1878 to about 1888, so for a 10-year time span, this uniform jacket was in the hands of a soldier. 3 to possibly 4 soldiers wearing it at different times. And then once that soldier was out, they would sell it or trade it off to another soldier, and it just changed hands and changed hands. The other thing is, many times you would have a uniform jacket that was pre the new requisitions, or not the requisite, but the new requirements. The requirements for a uniform of how it was supposed to look. And so if these new ones came out, these new requirements, then they would have to take the jacket and maybe adapt it a little bit to change it up to meet those new requirements of what the uniform was supposed to look like. So there are a few changes that were done to the outside of the uniform, but I always like to see this inside piece right here and showcase those names of the soldiers.
The coloring of the top part of it looks like it is the color of maybe buckskin. That's not leather, is it?
The liner is a cotton, and then you have wool, and then you have some sort of maybe like polished cotton at the bottom, and then on the exterior is going to be wool.
Oh, okay. All right.
And then depending on what branch of service you were in, there would be trim colors that would be placed on there. And you can see yellow that would kind of peek out here and at the very bottom and on the sides right there. So that would be designated for a mounted soldier, a cavalry soldier.
All right. Well, thank you, Corey. I'll take a little bit of time and kind of scan around the room so folks can have an idea of the rest of the artifacts that are in here now. As you say, these things change from time to time.
Sure.
And I'll be sure to include a link in the video description below to your website so that they can keep up on what is happening.
Sure.
Okay, how things are changing. Thank you once again.
You're welcome.